The original cartoon came out in 1937, and very evidently so. There's a big focus on her love story with a guy who literally stalks her. Weird. All of Andrew's scenes could get cut. Who knows? It's Hollywood, baby.
I was scared of the original cartoon. I think I watched it once and then I never picked it up again.
After countless controversies, this movie finally hit the cinemas. This is the latest remake of the many, many remakes Disney has produced of its animated classics. It's based on Disney's own 1937 technical masterpiece, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. For a movie to be based on Disney's greatest technological advancement for its time, saying this movie has shitty graphics is an understatement. The forest looks fake. Dwarves hardly look believable with the uncanny valley animation choice they made.
Even the other Disney adaptations have better graphics than this. This is such a massive slap in the face to Disney's 1937 Snow White. For context, when 1937 Snow White was released, the level of animation captivated the audience's attention immediately. It left a lot of them wondering how such a leap in the animation was possible when just 2 years prior, the animation looked like this. In trying to recreate the technological marvel that Snow White was, it doesn't even seem like the makers even tried to push any boundaries or take any risk.
First, they decided against casting real-life little people to play the dwarfs by listening to Peter Dinklage's feedback, which made no sense whatsoever. If the personalities of the dwarfs were slightly altered, it would have actually given Disney a lot of good press for casting 7 little people in the starring roles of such a big-budget feature-length movie. Sadly, instead of that, we got this monstrosity. They look straight out of a very low-budget Barbie movie in the early 2000s. They decided to reshoot the dwarfs portions with CGI characters instead and call them quote-unquote magical creatures, whatever that means.
And that's not even the end of the absolute shitstorm this movie was. We now have 7 magical creatures, and we also have 7 bandits. Within the 7 bandits, we have a real-life little person, which opens to many can of worms in the world of the story. The makers somehow felt no need to explain why there are 2 different versions of the dwarves in the same movie. One live action and one with CGI. Make it make sense.
Let's have a look at the story here. In this version, they gave us a whole backstory of how the wonderful king and queen prayed for a child, and the child was named Snow White because she was born in the winter. Do they think the audiences are stupid? What the fuck of an excuse is that? It's clearly a lame excuse to justify the casting decision Disney made. They obviously tried to distance themselves from the original character description while she was called Snow White because she had lips red as the rose, hair black as ebony, and skin as white as snow. The king and queen teach her to be fearless, fair, brave, and true, to be able to rule the kingdom with kindness one day. And their version of kindness is, wait for it, baking pies, and giving it to a few of their subjects. This is giving Marie Antoinette's let them eat cake more than convincing us that they're actually great rulers.
How on earth will feeding your subjects pie solve any of the possible issues the subjects may be facing? They literally went, logic? We don't need that here. It's Snow White, so people will see it anyways. Now, the mom dies and the dad just had to marry the queen because she's pretty? So let me get this straight. I thought this movie was above the physical beauty because just a few minutes ago, the princess was named Snow White because of the weather and not her skin tone or beauty. But they literally contradict themselves within 10 minutes and now go, yeah, he married her because the queen was pretty. We also basically get no justification of why the oh-so-kind and just king immediately marries another woman after his wife dies. Doesn't really sound like such a great man to me. Speaking of the queen, casting Gal Gadot as the evil queen is probably the worst decision Disney has ever made.
It's kinda hard to believe that the evil queen envies Rachel Zegler's beauty when it's being played by Gal Gadot, who looks like this. I mean, who do you think would actually believe that? The evil queen, as an act from extreme jealousy, cut Snow White's hair short to make her look uglier, whereas in the original movie, we do not get any backstory of Snow White's parents. We only witness the jealousy of the evil queen towards Snow White because Snow White is physically so beautiful, whereas the evil queen's beauty does not compare to hers, and the animators actually made it look convincing, unlike the trash this movie was. And instead of the sweet meet cute song between the prince and Snow White, we have no such thing here. Instead, the prince is basically discarded and replaced by, wait for it, a bandit. Wow, that made things so much better.
Remember when Rachel said this?
Yeah.
Saved by the prince.
She's not going to be saved by the prince, and she's not going to be dreaming about true love. She's dreaming about becoming the leader she knows she can be, and the leader that her late father told her that she could be if she was fearless, fair, brave, and true.
But she is actually gonna be saved by a bandit instead. How progressive. Anyways, Snow White helps him escape when he tries stealing something. But the queen sees them, of course, because Snow White makes no attempts whatsoever to be discreet about it. The queen orders the huntsman to take Snow White to pick apples here versus wildflowers in the original movie because the flowers are uncool and too feminine? I don't even know. At this point, they're just changing the most absurd things and calling it a day by doing the bare minimum. So we then proceed to get the most sorry excuse of acting I have seen in years. The huntsman tries to kill her by raising the sword like it's a fucking children's toy, and Snow White, in return, is making the most absurd faces in the name of a scared expression I've ever seen. It literally looks like children are acting for a school play.
The same scene in the original movie looks really scary and the stakes were really high there. The huntsman actually looked terrifying and Snow White really looked like she was scared to lose her life any second. On the contrary, for this adaptation, nobody could care less because the reactions are so soulless and half-hearted.
The horror montage of Snow White running away into the forest was so well animated in the original, whereas we get such mediocre and subpar graphics here instead. In the original version, when Snow White cries and tries to talk to the animals after composing herself, it doesn't seem out of the blue, because we've already seen earlier scenes of her talking to birds, and even helping a bird out to find its parents. She really feels for anyone or anything that have lost their parents because she doesn't have parents either. So when she asks the animals what they do when they're feeling scared or sad, they communicate to her that they sing. And these interactions between the animals and Snow White immerses us into the film.
Snow White doesn't randomly sing just to fulfill a purpose of a musical. She sings because that's one of the only ways she has to feel better after nearly facing death and having no place to stay. Observing her kindness and hardworking personality, the animals are won over by her and only then take her to a place to stay, which is so unlike the adaptation, where we get no such depth whatsoever. She doesn't even talk to the animals here. They just randomly show up and show her the way to the dwarf's house out of nowhere. By missing so many small but key details like this, it really makes this film basically defy logic of a smooth flowing script.
After entering the house, Snow White in the original deduces they are 7 little men staying here. Looking at the poor condition of the house, she thinks maybe they have no parents and are orphans. So she decides to clean the place and make soup in the hopes of them letting her stay. She doesn't randomly walk in like an entitled person and sleep in one of their beds like the adaptation. Eliminating all of these scenes really turns her into a very bratty, selfish character here.
The song, Whistle While You Work, was originally the song Snow White sung when she cleaned the house with the help of the animals in the hopes of the dwarves letting her stay. Instead, here we get a very bratty Snow White ordering the dwarves to clean their own house while she sings around doing nothing, expecting a place to stay for free. I really don't know what the makers intended by such a weird change. If they were trying to defy gender roles, they were idiotically trying to do it without understanding the whole plot of the original scene. How hard is it to understand? She basically tries to be of some use to them in the hopes of them letting her stay. Where does gender roles even play a part here?
If all this bag of trash wasn't enough, this is where the whole story takes a shittier turn. The huntsman basically hides an apple Yes, you heard it right. A fucking apple! In the box where the queen asked for Snow White's heart. Since apples don't look anywhere close to a heart, the queen being tricked literally indicates that she didn't even bother to check it. This makes the evil queen look really idiotic rather than scary. In the original, the huntsman gives her the box with a pig's heart instead, which is a way more believable scenario because it would imply the queen actually checked if the huntsman did his job by killing the one person she's the most jealous of. We then see her ordering her army to find Snow White. Yes, she has an army now. Apparently, she somehow tricked the king into leaving and got him killed. So much for a noble and great king. And now the kingdom is in ruin because she embezzles all the money for herself. All these new details add nothing to the plot.
Here's where we get to meet our not prince but bandit again. He also has 7 people as a part of his bandit crew. He then proceeds to literally save Snow White twice by taking a bullet for her the second time, and she doesn't really seem to care about it whatsoever. Whenever she's with him, she somehow becomes extra entitled and bratty. I didn't think was possible. Which leaves me wondering, why do they like each other? Sure, they have more scenes than the couple in the original movie, but the original couple's one song had way better chemistry than the many scenes these two had. Snow White doesn't even realize he took a fucking bullet to save her life until this real life dwarf bandit guy mentions it to her. It really reinforces her being a pretty self-absorbed, shallow character. Doc somehow saves him, and now we get a very boring romance montage. We then see the queen disguising herself as a witch. She reveals to Snow White that her bandit lover is captured and out of nowhere tricks Snow White into eating the apple. The only excuse she comes up with is that the apple would sustain her on the road to rescue her lover. What? She literally is living at the dwarf's place where there's plenty of more food than just a single fucking apple.
In the original, the witch appears and asks if she's making pies. She answers yes, gooseberry pies for the little men. The witch then says, apple pies made by juicy apples like these make men's mouths water. She asks her to taste it, but the birds, being her friends, attack her. Snow White asks them to stop attacking the poor old lady. The witch, seeing this, acts like she's exhausted and asks her to take her inside the house for water and to rest. The animals, seeing this, run off to the mine to drag the dwarves to the house. They don't understand what's going on and why the animals are acting this way. Since Snow White has been so kind, the witch now offers her the apple. She says it's no ordinary apple, it's a wishing apple. One bite and all her dreams will come true. She asks her to make a wish and take a bite. The whole scene is very detailed, so it makes the audiences believe that if a girl is as sweet and innocent, the excuses the witch makes are believable enough to fall for. But in the adaptation, we literally get no such depth. The witch tells her that her lover is captured and somehow makes her eat the apple by breaking the news.
And then we randomly get cuts of the animals trying to warn the dwarves, but the animals weren't even present when the witch appeared. Also, we don't see Snow White interacting with animals as much at all in this whole movie. So all this seems so illogical and idiotic. It's really shallow and it shows us how the makers literally did not understand what part of the story of the 1937 version made it flow so well. Although yes, the story on paper seems really simple, but there are so many visual elements to the movie that the makers really failed to pay attention to. Snow White then eats the apple and faints. The bandit guy then saves her with the worst kiss I've ever seen in the movies recently. And this whole moment feels so empty and hollow compared to how fantastical this moment was in the original. This was the highlight of the movie and the whole movie was building up for it. But this scene literally looked like it was added in as the final resort rather than making this scene the highlight of the movie.
And the movie doesn't end here. After she's not saved by the prince, but the bandit because it's so groundbreaking, she suddenly has the urge to take over the throne from the evil queen. Yes, the evil queen is still alive here. If we recap what happened in the original, the animals witnessing the witch tricking Snow White run to the mines and literally drag the dwarves into the home on their backs. When they see the witch there, they literally chase her to her death. No such thing happens here. The dwarves in 2025 do nothing to contribute to the plot. They went from being the main characters and the ones driving the action in 1937 to being mere background characters in 2025. So Snow White decides to take the throne now. Great! Hope she has a very smart plan to achieve it. Of course not. Her plan of taking over is literally her walking to the palace where people magically remember the abandoned princess who hasn't been seen for years, and they somehow end up supporting her in mere seconds. The evil queen literally gives her a sword and asks her to kill her. But since Snow White is literally idiotic, she doesn't do it. The queen then orders her men to kill her, but Snow White wins them over by remembering their names. This is the sorriest excuse for a plot device I've seen in years, and I've seen many movies. The queen then finally goes to the mirror and asks who's the fairest of all, and he says Snow White as she's kind. So if kindness is the measure of fair in the mirror's eyes, why was the evil queen ever the fairest of them all? She was never kind, nor did it seem like she wanted to be. The movie has zero consistent narratives. The method in which the queen died is ridiculous at best. She smashes the mirror in anger and somehow the mirror disintegrates along with her? What the fuck? The reason why or how isn't explained whatsoever, and it makes the entire point of the story kinda useless.
Let's talk about the music here. Rachel Zegler in this movie is an amazing singer, especially in the song Waiting on a Wish in the beginning of the movie. However, the same cannot be said for Gal Gadot. We can literally hear the auto-tune oozing out of her when it's her turn to sing. Having a really great singer and a really bad one in the same movie is really jarring.
The Evil Queen's songs especially seem campier and more comical rather than evil because of the lack of singing or acting ability. It was also pretty disappointing that iconic songs like I'm Wishing and One Song were cut from this movie. Good Things Grow, I think, is supposed to be the main title track for this movie, but it wasn't doing much for me to be honest. Additionally, the choreography of Whistle While You Work is very lacking. It literally feels like Snow White is dancing around while not doing any of the work and forcing the strange-looking dwarves to do all the work.
Overall, the costumes for the movie is totally a mixed bag. But let's talk about the iconic dresses first. The 1937 movie's Snow White dress is a combination of 1930s fashion and 16th century German fashion. We assume it's 16th century because the original Snow White story, written by Grimm's brothers, are speculated to be inspired by folk tales around 16th century Germany. The hairstyle is a direct inspiration from the 1930s shorter haircut with curls. The sleeve rolls with colored slashes on her dress and her high-standing collar are likely to be inspired by 16th century paintings by Lucas Cranach. For the 2025 version, it seems like they tried to not trail too far from the original. We now have longer sleeves in addition to the puffy sleeves the original Snow White had. It doesn't blend too well with the world of the movie, making her stick out too much and not in a good way. The addition of sleeves was a pretty poor choice in my opinion, as the skirt was a huge letdown. It was giving too much of a ball gown skirt where the original did not. Coming from such a large studio like Disney, we would usually expect something more intricate or grand since they have such a massive budget for their adaptations. But clearly, the budget did not go to the dress whatsoever. This literally looks like they bought it off of Amazon and made the actress wear it. A lot of cosplay and historical fashion channels have done a much better job at recreating or designing the dresses inspired by this outfit than Disney themselves, and they're not even getting paid for it. The hairstyle of Snow White especially was the biggest disappointment. Instead of adding curls to shorter hair like they did in the 1930s, it looks like an unstyled bob when someone just wakes up and runs to work because they didn't have time to style their hair. which takes us completely out of the fantasy princess element. However, I kind of like how they styled the evil queen. Not too much use of CGI there, giving us a feeling of realism. Loved the colors on it, and the headpiece was great as well. The only issue here is the evil queen also does not blend well in the world of the movie at all. But that was also the same case for the original movie. The costumes of the bandits were absolutely horrendous and unacceptable. They kind of looked like they were wearing costumes that were meant for the dwarves. It looked like such a half-assed last-minute add-on. The worst abomination of it all was the character design of the witch. In the original movie, her character design really brought out the horror quality of the film, making the stakes feel super high, whereas the witch here doesn't look scary whatsoever. The choice of wearing all white for the finale song was really questionable. If Disney wanted to distance themselves from the as white as snow narrative, this really isn't helping their case.
Let's finally talk about the controversies around the film. Most of the controversies of the movie is mainly because of the lead actress Rachel Zegler's statements regarding the film.
I mean, the original cartoon came out in 1937, and very evidently so. There's a big focus on her love story with a guy who literally stalks her.
Yeah.
Weird.
The whole language used here really seems like she literally does not care about the original movie at all. Which is fine since she isn't the scriptwriter or director of this film. But when people who are supposed to be the face of the movie make such ignorant statements, it makes us wonder if this also was how the discussions were within the makers of the movie. By not attempting to understand what the original movie was trying to convey, how could they have ever make a good adaptation of it? Snow White was released at the time of the Great Depression, where many had lost their jobs and there was a sense of dread looming around in general. Part of the reason why the movie was so well received was that Snow White was a symbol of working hard, being kind, and wishing for better days, which may one day happen to the audiences themselves. This is a pretty realistic message that the people at the time resonated with. Snow White the princess may look like she's waiting around for others to get the work done at first, but if you watch the original again, the message seems pretty clear. She wasn't just waiting for a prince to save her. After literally narrowly escaping death, she cries over her situation a bit, but then, with the help of the animals, cheers herself up with a song to go through such a traumatic situation and then proceeds to look at what options she has. And when she finds a home she can stay in, she tries her best to win over the dwarves so that they can let her stay. She did all she could with what she was given. She didn't reclaim the throne just by walking over to the palace and remembering people's names. She lived happily with what she had and just wished for things to get better someday. And her reward for enduring such a hardship was the prince taking her away to a castle. Aww.
We're not against making changes in the original movie story. But to make new changes, you need to understand the source material really well first. Additionally, Rachel's unnecessary political statements attached to the movie's promotional tweets didn't help whatsoever. It was pretty unacceptable for her to make such tweets directly while promoting the movie, which she was paid to do. She was also basically shading her co-actor, Gal Gadot, who was from Israel and clearly had a pro-Israel stance. There's nothing wrong with having different political opinions, and there's nothing wrong in voicing them out. But doing so when you're paid to promote and tweet about the movie is highly irresponsible. Their awkward interactions at the Oscars didn't help too. They literally treated each other like the other didn't exist. Additionally, a few days before the release, Rachel goes on to say this on a live stream.
Everyone who hates when I win, the winged victory came to the Louvre in pieces, and people still line up to see her. And I can only hope that despite my flaws, and despite my cracks and my breaks, and there are many of them, that at every premiere and everything I do, people will wait in line to see.
I'm not sure why she continues to dig her own grave here. She must know the movie's already not so good, so I don't understand why she's expecting people will line up to see the movie only for her. People are mostly just showing up because of the Snow White IP. These statements by her make her look highly delusional. And all this is after Disney panicked and tried to minimize her interview promotions leading up to the movie. She was mostly seen promoting in non English speaking countries by singing. Because of all these PR disasters, Disney seemed to have the perfect excuse for the poor performance of the movie. They are literally just blaming Rachel being the sole reason for this piss poor performance in the box office.
The Little Mermaid actress Hailey Bailey fell into similar casting controversies, which created an uproar on social media. But many people showed up to the theaters and it eventually ended up being profitable anyways. So it's a bit of a stretch to say everyone is following these online controversies. The majority of them don't even pay attention. So saying that Rachel is the only reason why people didn't show up to this movie is completely false. People are just tired of these shitty-ass remakes, and since Disney decided to be very low-key regarding the movie's promotion and premiere leading up to the release, people didn't know it was coming out and didn't care to watch another shitty adaptation again. This movie officially has the worst opening weekend collection out of all the Disney adaptations. And considering that the original Snow White is what started it all, and literally gave Disney the funds to eventually expand to various animated movies and emerge as a media giant, this is Disney's biggest failure to date. Let's look at the stats to get a bigger picture. Snow White's opening weekend collection is about $42.2 million. Although this number looks pretty big, if you compare it with the opening collections of the other movies and the massive budget of this movie, saying it's underperforming is an understatement. The movie Dumbo, released in 2019, had a larger opening weekend, and considering the Dumbo IP is nowhere near the popularity of Snow White, so that's really saying something. For this movie to break even, it needs to at least surpass $270 million, which is the movie production cost. Overall, with the marketing costs included, the movie at least needs to gross around $300 million to break even, and that's putting the number very generously. Looking at the massive drop on the second weekend, the possibility of this seems really slim. Along with having the lowest opening week collection, Snow White also has the steepest drop on the second weekend, making the situation really dire for Disney. Let's discuss about what slowly led to this disastrous outcome.
Disney has been churning out adaptation after adaptation for the past 15 years by rehashing their own movies that made them the massive company they are today. They were once known for always pushing the boundaries in terms of animation and film. The period between 1989 and 1999 was known as the Disney Renaissance, and this is the period where they made so many amazing movies one after another. The Little Mermaid, Beauty and the Beast, Aladdin, The Lion King, Pocahontas, Hercules, Mulan, Tarzan. All these movies received amazing reviews from critics and they were amazingly loved in the box office as well. The Lion King went on to become the biggest hit of all, making about $1 billion. It was among the top 100 of the most successful films of all time. You may be thinking why the 90s movies like Toy Story isn't mentioned here. It's because Disney did not make this film. It's a Pixar film. In the 80s, Pixar Studios was a smaller animation company which were making ads in the hopes of one day making a full-length animated feature film. Disney was interested in their Tim Toy idea and wanted to make a full-length film from the perspective of a toy. Pixar then signed with Disney, with them agreeing to distribute 3 of their films. Toy Story was released in 1995, becoming the second highest grossing movie of the year, and it also became one of the first full-length computer-generated film. Hence, Disney continued to partner with Pixar. Their own studios hand-drawn animation movies like Emperor's New Groove wasn't doing commercially well, although they are beloved by fans. Hand-drawn animation from there on was starting out to be considered outdated. But Disney were also not working on computer-generated animation. Meanwhile, Pixar movies like Monsters Inc., The Incredibles were doing well phenomenally, and their competition, DreamWorks, got in a massive hit with Shrek.
Since Disney couldn't compete with these studios, their CEO, Bob Iger, decided to acquire Pixar in 2006 for $7.4 billion. This type of strategy would unfortunately continue in the 2000s as well. Although every movie from Pixar after 2006 is owned by Disney, they were not creatively responsible for it. John Lasseter from Pixar asked for complete creative control over their ideas, and Disney, having no choice at the time, agreed. At this time, their own studio's animated pictures weren't working out. The only movies that carried them through the 2000s was Pirates of the Caribbean and Chronicles of Narnia. Disney, while facing a crisis like this, instead of sitting with a creative team, nurturing their own art with fresh stories and boundary-pushing animation, they resorted to buy out companies that were producing good and commercially successful art instead. Disney has a history of buying out the companies that are their competitors. Another major acquisition for Disney was Marvel Studios. They own so many companies, not only in the entertainment business, but also real estate companies, merchandise companies, theme parks, etc. Using this strat, they somehow survived the early 2000s. The 2010s were followed by the era of adaptations like Alice in Wonderland, Maleficent, Cinderella, and that all performed very well at the box office. Lion King live action was one of the highest grossing animated movies of all time, grossing around $1.6 billion. However, adaptations that followed later like Mulan and Peter Pan were highly unprofitable, showing us that the audience was slowly becoming tired of these adaptations. Therefore, Disney decided to switch things up by casting a black actress as Ariel in The Little Mermaid. This, although causing a lot of online discourse, performed decently well at the box office. However, using a similar strategy again in Snow White, plus the movie being even worse than the Little Mermaid movie, brought this adaptation to its inevitable debacle it is now.
The Disney that was so ambitious and innovative in their earlier days always focused on how to tell a story well first before making movies just for the sake of box office collections. The Disney we know of today had none of the qualities it once possessed. The animations and graphics are nowhere near groundbreaking. There is no push for innovation and there's no taking risk whatsoever. They've just come up with a formula to collect coins and they keep repeating it. The if ain't broke, don't fix it mentality is finally the reason for their massive downfall. They don't even try telling new stories anymore. A massive part of their budget and marketing is reserved for these shitty remakes. They don't even attempt to change anything. They want to capitalize on the nostalgia factor but at the same time want to make just enough changes. This is where the progressive changes and the race swapping the leads come in. They want to get the social media points for making progressive versions of the same story, which inherently isn't a bad thing. But by doing the bare minimum, these changes they make really feel hollow and insincere. Instead of making movies with progressive stories that reflect today's views, they choose to rehash the older stories, criticize them as a product of their time, and then proceed to release them. They don't want to make leading iconic movies anymore. They'd rather just follow IPs that guarantee an audience and call it a day. I can't even remember a live action movie adaptation I liked more than the original. The audiences are tired of giving these movies a chance and expecting to relive at least 10% of the magic the original had.
Although the movie underperforming is good news, as it actually tells Disney that the audiences aren't interested in adaptations anymore. We don't think that this trend will end because of one disastrous movie. Disney plans to release a Lilo and Stitch adaptation next year, and since Stitch is one of the most marketable characters internationally, we think this movie would be a massive success over the IP alone, regardless of its quality. Also, it seems like Disney now wants to readapt very recent films as well. Tangled, the movie which was released not too long ago, is also in the works for another adaptation. Although one might think that Disney will someday run out of stories to be adapted, they've become more shameless and are resorting to adapt very recent movies as well. If this trend continues, we may someday see a readaptation of the 2025 Snow White, maybe like 6 years later, because they want to fix the mistakes or whatever bullshit reason they would give. Let's go back in time to discuss how the first Snow White film came to be. Very few had even attempted a full-length animated feature film before this. The first we know of was in 1917, which was lost. But the earliest surviving animated feature film is from 1926, which is The Adventures of Prince Ahmed. It took around 2 million sketches and 750 artists who poured their heart and soul into drawing them and transferring into cells. Colors were then added to them and then combined into almost 250,000 frames to bring this movie to the level that it finally turned out to be. The painstaking process took around 4 years to make, as the production of the movie started in 1934 but could only finally be released in 1937. The budget, which was initially $250,000, finally became 6 times its original number. While short cartoons at the time had simple, exaggerated movements, for example, Walt Disney released a short called Goddess of Spring in 1937, where the main female character's dance movement were pretty noodle-like and had a lot to be desired. Walt wanted Snow White to feel natural, realistic, and emotionally engaging. A more sophisticated use of color and shading was used to give the world a more three-dimensional feeling. Mary Weiser, a member of the ink and paint department, noticed that there was a problem in the coloring because the colors wouldn't mix well in the cells, and majority of the time was spent in cleaning up the cells that were unsatisfactory or just redo it altogether. So she decided to get a whole chemistry degree to understand the composition of the pigments that they were mixing to avoid making too many mistakes and arriving at a more diverse range of colors they could mix. This led to her becoming the supervisor. Through this, Disney became the first and only animation studio to create its own paints.
In 1934, Walt Disney recited an idea for an early version of Snow White along with the characters and personalities to their animators. This meeting also intended to inspire the animators and push the boundaries of what was possible through the medium of animation, to motivate them to do something that had never been done before and create a full feature-length animation that carried the same dramatic depth and relatability of live-action films. The movie's initial idea was so ambitious at the time that the over 3-year production from 1934 to 1937, many critics doubted that the film was even technically possible. The film was referred to as Disney's folly. Many were skeptical that the audience could sit through more than an hour's worth of cartoons without getting headaches or becoming bored. But what the makers realized is that to capture the audience's attention, they would need an emotional connection to the film that the previous animated films were unable to produce. The gap between the animated characters and the audiences needed to be bridged. Hence, they tried a different approach to the character designs this time. This was an attempt made to bring to the table a quality of realism within the characters of the story, giving the audience the illusion that this was all happening to a real person who can think and feel, allowing the audiences to empathize with Snow White and the dwarfs with their struggles and emotions, all while retaining the charm and whimsy that comes from the unreal nature of animation. In an attempt to give the whimsical nature of animation a touch of reality, a major part of the movie's design decisions were all made to carefully maintain the balance between the two, one not overshadowing the other. This can be observed by how the early character designs of Snow White and the dwarfs were way more in the caricature style that was popular at the time. Snow White especially resembled the style of Betty Boop, which was a popular show at the time. However, the design slowly progressed to a way more realistic looking Snow White. This chase for a more realistic animation did not stop just with the character designs. Walt Disney hired real actors to enact the scenes of the movie for the live action movement. These were either used as reference for the animators to understand the movement of the characters better or rotoscope directly. Additionally, he also had his animators attend live drawing classes for free to capture real life movements better. These classes have been offered since 1932 during the making of this movie. Disney has been the only entertainment studio to continue the unbroken tradition of offering free live drawing classes for its artists within the studios till date.
To give the audiences an additional layer of immersion into the movie, the camera had to move like it does in live-action films. To achieve this, Disney devised an entirely new way to capture the animation. It's called the multiplane camera. They are operated in a very similar way as traditional animation camera. In the traditional setting, the cells were stacked, captured, and moved ever so slightly to produce the illusion of movement. But it had a key difference. The cells here, instead of being stacked on top of each other, each one was suspended individually. This allows the animators to control the speed, depth, and movement of each layer separately, allowing for many elements in the background to move as well. This could be done for up to 7 such individual layers. By using the technique of artistically moving all the different layers, the animators created the illusion of a whirling vortex for the Queen's transformation scene into the witch. This whole new world made possible by the multiplane camera technique allowed for a new leap in the direction of cartoons. For the first time, animators could realistically simulate camera movement and could control where the camera is placed in any scene, as if it was actually located inside the world of Snow White. Instead of the plane, only a single direction of the front-facing camera of early cartoons, the viewer could now move between different camera angles. The viewer could now see the perspective of a bird on top of a tree looking down into the ground, or of Snow White herself looking into a well. All of this reinforces the realism aspect of the cartoon and make their actions have higher stakes in the point of view of the audiences. Locations like the dwarf's cottage and the evil queen's castles were designed to keep in mind the early European fairy tale illustrations. They were exaggerated and fantastical, but portraying the strengths of the medium of animation, but at the same time, not so unreal that the audiences could not relate to them or imagine themselves in that world. Sound effect engineer Jimmy McDonald's, who also worked in a lot of Mickey Mouse cartoons earlier, really went above and beyond to use various different instruments to produce unique sounds that really provided an immersive experience to the audiences. All these ingredients like characters, music, sound, camera movement, animations were meticulously worked on like a chef's recipe to finally achieve the product which is the exquisite balance between the real and the imagination.
In 1937, shortly after the movie premiered, Harrison's reports wrote, Snow White was entertainment that should be enjoyed by everyone. Intelligent adults will marvel at the mechanical ingenuity that went into making of it. And it is something to marvel at, for at times the characters seem lifelike. That is brought about by expert synchronization of the action with the music and dialogue. After coming from a place known for its innovation, it's really saddening to see that this is how low Disney has stooped. As a very direct comparison, both the original and the adaptation faced many issues while making their films. It took 4 years to make both these films. The budget of both of these films ballooned to a massive number. People heavily criticized both movies before it released, but these films had massively different outcomes once they hit the theaters. The only difference that made one film a masterpiece and the other film absolute garbage was conviction. The makers of the original had the conviction to prove everyone wrong and tirelessly worked towards it, meticulously working on every little detail for the movie to resonate with the masses. Whereas the other one was basically made by the finance bros running the company. The priority was how to get easy money first, and there was no effort made whatsoever to understand the source material and tastefully make changes and to actually make a movie worth remembering after its box office run. This is why the original stands tall as one of the most iconic films ever made, being the fairest of them all indeed. That's the end of our video with the Movie Magnet podcast. Please like, share and subscribe if you liked the video. We'll see you next time.